Morning, everybody. What is going on today? Let me know if you can hear me and see me okay. Morning, everybody in the chat. Thank you for joining me this morning. We'll give it a few minutes here for some folks to trickle in. I know this was an early, more spontaneous one. Wasn't sure what time I wanted to do a stream this morning because of the timing of the severe weather. But here we are, and we are going to do a stream today. We're just going to focus on today's threat. We'll talk about tomorrow briefly, but I wanted to just focus on today's threat, which is already underway, it seems. There's been a batch of storms this morning across Mississippi that has popped off a little bit more than expected. But that's an early round, and we're going to see probably a little bit of a lull until we get some stuff to fire, maybe late morning to early afternoon across East Texas, and then, of course, the warm sector we'll have to watch out for. We talked about some of the drawbacks to that warm sector regime in our last live stream, but we'll go over things today. We have some more data in. We'll take a look at some new model data. There have been some slight tweaks in the model data, some trends that we've seen. I was just going over some of the new data, and a little bit of an interesting change from what we talked about last time as far as the breadth of the warm sector, and at least the northward extent of the warm sector. So that should be pretty interesting to discuss. But again, we will give it a couple more minutes here, maybe 8:34, 8:35, and then we will start. Hope everyone's doing well out there. This looks to be our last severe weather event for at least a little bit here. We'll go into a pretty quiet pattern after this trough moves through, or after this system moves through today and tomorrow. And then we will be pretty quiet for the coming few days. No severe weather on the radar, no pun intended, for at least the next 7 to 8 days after this system. So we'll keep an eye on things. This is obviously early in the year, plenty of time for things to change. And I'm sure we will get some severe weather again at some point, perhaps in January. But for now, it looks pretty quiet after this setup. But we've got to get through this setup before we take a little bit of a respite here. So again, just another minute or two, and then we will get started. But thanks to everyone again for joining. Glad the video and audio are doing okay. We'll do another minute here, and then we'll get started. But thanks everybody for joining this morning. Again, as always, if you have any questions on today's setup, hold them toward the end. We'll do that typical Q&A that we usually do toward the end of the stream. So hold on to those questions until then, and I will answer as many as I can once the stream ends here. All right, 8:34. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so this is what we got going on right now. We're going to get a new outlook here in an hour or two, but this is what they have right now. Slight risk, level 2 out of 5 in the yellow shaded region you see here. So that extends all the way from East Texas, north of the Houston metro area, over through much of Louisiana, the southern 2/3 of Mississippi, into western and central and south central Alabama. So places like Shreveport, Natchitoches, down toward Alexandria, Lake Charles, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, up toward Jackson, Natchez, Vicksburg, over toward Montgomery in Alabama. You're in the greatest severe weather threat for today. They did mention an upgrade possible in last night's outlook. They kind of took that away in the latest couple of outlooks, but that is still on the table. Would be a little surprised if they did it based on some of the uncertainties in the setup. We talked about them in our last live stream. We'll talk about those again today. Judy, thank you very much for the super chat. Much appreciated. Miller, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you as well. So that is what we've got going on for the slight risk today. Again, upgrade possible, unlikely at this point, I think, but still on the table for sure. Here is our tornado risk for today. It is at a 5% as expected from basically the Louisiana-Texas border, east and northeastward through much of Louisiana, much of that Mississippi portion of the slight risk, and over into Alabama. 5%, 2% surrounds that all the way up to the Alabama-Tennessee border, up toward Huntsville, over toward Shreveport, Houston, in that 2%, very western edge of the 2%. and then over toward Lake Charles, you are in the 2% for today. Damaging wind also going to be a threat, 15% area, large 15% area coinciding with the slight risk. And then large hail could be a threat. I don't think it's going to be the biggest threat with this setup, but over toward East Texas into western Louisiana, western and northern Louisiana, we could see a few isolated large hailstones with today's setup. But again, I think the greatest threats are going to be damaging winds first and foremost, and then a few tornadoes are possible with this setup, especially going into the evening into the overnight hours. That's when I'm keying in on the perhaps greatest tornado risk with this setup as storms move off to the east. Then we have tomorrow. It is at a marginal risk for tomorrow, up from Virginia all the way down through the Carolinas, eastern Tennessee, down into the southeast for the ongoing storms that will continue into tomorrow. Level 1 out of 5 marginal risk, and we'll talk about that briefly as we go toward the end of the video. But 2% tornado risk there from central Alabama northeastward into western North Carolina. 5% hail, or 5% wind risk tomorrow as well within that marginal. Large hail is not expected with tomorrow's storms. But again, the main threat is going to be today with that slight risk from Texas eastward into Alabama. We've had some action already this morning. This is the current mosaic radar across the southeast. Big band of storms from the mid-south, the Appalachians, all the way down into Louisiana this morning. We have had some tornado warnings here in southern Mississippi. Not really expected all that much. We've seen a little bit of remnant strong low-level shear this morning. We'll take a look at the observed Jackson sounding here in just a second, but we've had a little bit of low-level shear to deal with this morning, and enough instability to support some surface-based convection within this cluster in particular across southern Mississippi. We have seen some tornado warnings with this cluster, but this is expected to wane with time as it continues to move off to the east, outrun favorable instability. Back here to the west, across Mississippi, Louisiana, and East Texas is where we're really focusing on our main severe threat for at least the daytime portion of the event, and then things will shift east into Mississippi and Alabama as we go into the overnight hours tonight. But we'll have to keep watching these for the next couple hours or so, but again, they are going to outrun the instability, and even with strong low-level shear, they won't be able to produce significant severe weather any longer as we go forward through the morning. All right, let's take a look at some upper air data here. This is the 500 millibar map from the SPC mesoanalysis page. Pretty complex looking setup here. We have our an initial shortwave trough over the Great Lakes states right here with a pretty strong 100-knot jet streak. That is going to shift off to the northeast with time. We have a big ridge out here over the southeast into the Atlantic. Pretty stubborn ridge there, and that's going to play a role in today's setup as well. But this is our trough. This is the main trough back here over the desert southwest, just east of the Four Corners region. That's going to be our main player for today's setup. It's going to move off to the northeast today, and this ridge is going to just be parked here. So this trough is actually going to go kind of up and over this ridge instead of shifting off to the east more into closer to our area of interest. So we talked about this with our stream last time, that this trough is going to hang back pretty far west from our area of interest, so the forcing for ascent over the warm sector today is going to be fairly minimal because of this stubborn ridge and the path that this shortwave trough is going to take, more of a northeast path than a more eastward path. That would give us a little bit more closer proximity of the trough to our favorable warm sector. We'll go through some model data here in a second to put that in play. Jared Patterson, thank you so much for the super chat. Much appreciated. So again, this trough is going to be our main player, but it is sticking back off to the west. We'll do our omega calculations here in a second, because this is going to be a fairly decently fast-moving trough, but the location of the trough is going to be what is the main fly in the ointment with this setup, especially for warm sector convection today. Down at the surface, we've seen a very intense surface low develop out here across the Great Lakes region, 994 millibars as analyzed by the SPC mesoanalysis page. So very deep, intense surface low there. No doubt some winter weather with that. But down here to the south, we have a frontal zone that is draped through that pressure tongue down all the way into the southeast, into East Texas. And that is going to just kind of sit there through the day. This surface low is going to move off to the northeast with time. And this trailing portion of the front is going to be just kind of sitting there. And this trough will eventually shift off east enough to start overspreading this frontal zone, and that is going to create a secondary surface low that will develop across East Texas into Louisiana along the frontal zone. But that is expected to be later in the period, not expected to take place much during the day. We may see weak cyclogenesis along this frontal zone during the day, but the more intense cyclogenesis as the low travels along the front is going to be from the evening into the overnight hours. And that is going to lead to a delayed low-level response in our low-level winds. So much of the day is going to see a fairly weak low-level flow, and that should lead to a tempering of the low-level shear and low-level hodographs for some questions on the overall tornado risk with this setup. And I think one of the reasons they haven't upgraded the risk to maybe a 10% hatched for tornadoes, strong tornadoes, is that the low-level shear during the day is not expected to be all that strong because of the delayed surface response along this frontal zone. We'll show you some model data here in just a second to show you how that's going to play out. Let's go to some surface data here. Actually, I'm going to use the SPC mesoanalysis since the sectors here on the UCAR page aren't exactly perfect to show all of our area of interest. So I'll put on our observations here. I know the numbers are a little bit on the small side here, but hopefully you guys can read that. But we can see where our frontal zones are located. Cold front is right here through the wind shift. Northerly winds across Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, with more southerly flow down to the south across southeast Texas, northeastward into the Gulf Coast states there. So it looks like our cold front is draped somewhere sort of right in here. And this is just kind of eyeballing it as we go here, but it looks like it's right in there. So that's going to be our main cold front. And again, this is not going to move all that much during the day because that surface low associated with this cold front is way off to the north. So this trailing portion of the front, not really influenced by anything that's going to allow it to move until we get that surface low, that secondary surface low along the frontal zone to develop late this afternoon and into the evening and overnight. So this cold front will define the westward extent of the warm sector. We will have, this may act sort of as a warm front here off to the north, but we will see quite a bit of convection, and this is going to be our main initiating boundary for storms today. And because our synoptic forcing for ascent is going to hang back to the west quite a bit, I think most of our convection today, at least most of the robust convection, is going to hang closer to this frontal zone where we have a little bit of stronger frontal forcing to allow for storms to go up and sustain themselves. In the warm sector, we're relying solely on warm advection to get the job done, and we don't have synoptic forcing for ascent. That's usually a red flag as far as severe, robust storms actually happening in the warm sector. We need some type of synoptic forcing for ascent from a passing shortwave or something to allow us those warm sector storms to sustain. They can go up in the warm sector on that warm advection regime on just confluence bands, but whether or not they'll actually sustain, that is a huge question when you don't have strong forcing over the warm sector. Now we'll take a look at a sounding here in just a second from Jackson. We are uncapped, so I would expect to see some convection in the warm sector during the day. Will it become robust? I'm pretty skeptical of until later when we get a little bit stronger forcing to overspread the warm sector this evening into the overnight hours. So again, most of the convection today, I think, expected to remain closer to this frontal zone, may act as a sort of a warm front up here across the Tennessee, northern Mississippi, northern Alabama vicinity into Arkansas. But again, it's not going to move all that much regardless. So it's going to be, this frontal zone is going to be our main initiating boundary for storms in this particular setup. In the open warm sector, though, ahead of that front, we have a pretty juicy air mass in place. 70s dew points all the way up into central Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas coastal plain there. Pretty robust moisture in place at this point, and that is going to basically stay there. We have upper 60s all the way up into northern Mississippi, far southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana. So a fairly robust northward extending warm sector here. So we have a fairly broad warm sector. The question here, though, is how far north will that warm sector remain? Because I think there, again, is going to be a lot of convection on the frontal zone, and that may shunt the warm sector south. That's a trend we've seen in some of our model data, which we'll show in a second. But that is going to perhaps shunt the northward extent of the warm sector southward a little bit to truncate the overall severe risk to more southern portions of Louisiana, Mississippi, into Alabama, Texas coastal plain as well. So that'll be something to watch during the day. Less convection along the frontal zone, perhaps a farther north extent of the severe threat, more convection along the frontal zone, farther south location of the front and a southward shunting of the overall warm sector. All right, here is our Jackson sounding from this morning. Jackson, Mississippi, right there in south central Mississippi. And this is why we've seen some severe storms with a low-end tornado risk this morning. Not a ton of instability, and it's very skinny at that, but it is surface-based. We don't have any notable warm noses or capping inversions here within this profile. Mixed layer CAPE about 700 joules per kilogram, so plenty of CAPE to sustain warm sector convection, and we are uncapped as we said, and that should remain through the afternoon. Should have an uncapped warm sector, so that's going to allow for storms to be able to go up, or updrafts to be able to go up in that environment. It's the lack of forcing over the warm sector that may keep things at bay. And we have this nice looking hodograph, nice looking low level shear there, clockwise curved hodographs, about 230 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity this morning here at Jackson. So enough instability to support surface-based convection with strong low level shear that has allowed for a few tornado warnings this morning. Deep layer shear also pretty strong, 65 knots of 0 to 6 kilometer shear, so plenty of deep layer shear for organized convection. Now we should see a little bit of perhaps a subtle increase in instability this morning, especially with southern extent and back into Texas. So we should have plenty of instability for this setup. But with the low-level jet moving off to the east, we've had a little bit of a plume of low-level jet maintain itself across the southeast so far this morning. As you can see here, 30 to 35 knots or so across Alabama, Mississippi, down into Louisiana. So those storms have been right in that low-level jet core. That is going to wane through the day. So that is going to move off to the northeast, and in its wake, we're going to see fairly weak low-level flow, maybe 20 knots or so, as you see already across parts of Louisiana and East Texas. That's going to be common across the warm sector. And so we're going to see a decrease in low-level shear through the morning, and these hodographs are going to straighten out a little bit. So that also lends quite a bit of uncertainty to the overall tornado risk with warm sector convection, if any can sustain. It's that we'll have a fairly weak low-level shear profile until much later on in that surface low develops. That's when things are going to ramp up a little bit as far as the wind profiles. But for much of the day, the overall wind profile is going to be fairly straight and somewhat unsupportive of tornadoes through the day. All right, some model data for you. Here's the 12Z NAM at 500 millibars, and so we'll show you the progression of things here. So here's our big ridge over the Gulf there and into the Atlantic. Trough back here across the desert southwest. Lead trough up here up into the Great Lakes associated with that surface low, that intense surface low up there. So, but we're paying attention to this trough here. This is going to be our main player. So you see it does shift off to the east and northeast a little bit, but it kind of goes up and over this ridge. This ridge is very stubborn here over the Gulf. And so by 0Z, your exit region of this trough, which is positively tilted, might I add, is kind of up in here across the southern plains. And of course, our area of interest is over here, especially for warm sector convection. So that's going to be a major problem with this setup. Usually you want your shortwave to be impacting the warm sector during the day, at least giving a glancing blow, and this one is going to be pretty far back to the west. Now, it is a fairly fast-moving trough, and I'll go to our SPC href page to show you a little bit it shows it a little bit better here. But we'll start at 6Z. We'll do our omega analysis here. So this is at 6Z. So last night, 6Z. Our main jet streak is back in here. This one over Arizona and New Mexico. We'll put the center right there in maybe southeast Oklahoma. And then as we go forward to 0Z, covering that 18-hour period, you see it ejects pretty quickly off to the northeast. And by 0Z, we'll put it maybe there in eastern Oklahoma. So that distance there from southeast Oklahoma over here, I've already done the calculations for us. That's about 810 miles or so. Divide that by 18. So let's see, 810 divided by 18. It's about 45 miles per hour. 45 miles per hour translates to about 39 knots. So our jet translation speed is right on that 40-knot threshold for tornado outbreaks. The problem is it's so far to the west and not really impacting our area of interest. You see our main jet streak here on the href is this yellow right here, and our entire warm sector is really not even being impacted by the overall shortwave or the overall jet streak. So that's a big problem with this setup. Even with a decently fast-moving jet streak, I'm worried about how far west that is as far as getting robust convection in the warm sector. Now, it is going to be closer to the front, so areas to the west along that frontal zone are going to see a better chance for storms, especially with that extra frontal forcing. So that is going to be where the bulk of our most intense convection is going to be. It's going to be confined to that frontal zone through today, and the warm sector convection is just kind of a wait and see deal, but I am a little bit skeptical. Although we do have an uncapped air mass, as we talked about in the warm sector, and strong warm convection. So we'll just have to wait and see. I still am skeptical that storms, if they go up in the warm sector, will be able to sustain themselves. So that is my concern with warm sector convection today, and I think most of the convection will be along the frontal zone to the west. So that's going to put more of East Texas into Louisiana initially in the main threat, with lesser of a tornado risk, more of a large hail and damaging wind risk. And then as stuff moves off to the east and the trough does finally inch off to the east a little bit, you see 0Z here, and then we go into the evening hours. The trough finally starts to impinge upon a little bit more of the warm sector here overnight into Saturday morning. That's when things we could see an uptick in the intensity of storms, especially from a tornado perspective, and as that secondary surface low strengthens as well. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and show you how the surface is going to play out. So again, here's the broad view morning initialization of the model. Main surface low, deep surface low up there in the Great Lakes. Cold front draped down to the south through the pressure tongue down into East Texas. And we're expecting, again, secondary cyclogenesis here along the frontal zone in East Texas by late afternoon to early evening. And so I'll zoom in here to our southern plains sector to show you. So again, just to orient yourself here, here's our cold front right there where that temperature gradient and wind shift is. So we go through the day today and we see modest cyclogenesis here along the frontal zone in far south Texas. This is at 21Z, so 3 p.m. Central Time. We see a little bit of that counterclockwise curvature in the wind barbs there, so we are undergoing weak cyclogenesis at this point by mid to late afternoon and early evening, but it is fairly weak. And then as you see, we go forward in time, that surface low really starts to strengthen overnight. We get a little bit of a closed contour there as it moves into Louisiana, and that is going to lead to a strengthening of our low-level winds. So I'll go to our 850 millibar flow here. You see not much through the day, 20 to maybe some pockets of 30 knots there, but fairly weak low-level flow. And then as we go into the evening hours, evening and overnight hours, we get a much more broad batch of 40 to 45 knots of flow here across where the storms are going to be moving into. And that's going to lead to perhaps an uptick in the tornado threat as storms move off to the east in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama late night tonight into the overnight hours. And we see an even further increase going into the morning as well. So, and again, this has been a trend we've seen toward a weaker low-level flow regime over the warm sector during the day in previous runs. We'll go back to our previous runs here, and this is our low-level jet. So you see back a few runs ago, a couple days ago, we were seeing a nice low-level jet over the warm sector during the day. That would lead to stronger low-level shear, but since then we've seen a significant trend away from that toward more of a weaker flow regime over the warm sector, leading to a lesser tornado risk with any storms that do sustain in the open warm sector. So back to the surface here, and let's look at our so back to the surface depiction of of pressure contours here. So again, weak surface cyclogenesis by the afternoon, but a fairly truncated warm sector. You see cooler temperatures up here to the north, and we can really see this in our dew point field. So we'll go to our surface dew point. So again, although 60s dew points up into Tennessee by this point, as it was initialized, lots of rich moisture here to the south across the Gulf Coast states. But watch as we go forward in time. You see a pretty significant truncation of the warm sector. These red contours are lifted index, showing us where we have an unstable environment coinciding with this moisture. And here is basically our effective warm front that's been pushed south. Our synoptic warm front, or quasi-stationary front, is up in here where the main gradient is, but notice how we don't have any instability just to its south. It's all shunted down here where the 60s, upper 60s and 70s dew points are. That's because we're going to have a lot of convection along that frontal zone that's going to shunt the warm front south, and this is a big change as well in the last few runs. So we'll take a look at our previous runs here. Even in our last live stream, we saw a much more robust warm sector farther north through much more of the day. And this is at 0Z, so 6 p.m. Central. A lot more expansive warm sector still off to the north with instability up here, but we've seen a trend toward a much more truncated, southward shifted warm sector going into the evening hours today. So we'll have to watch that play out. If we get a lot of convection along that frontal zone, that's going to shunt the front south, shunt the overall warm sector south, and the main severe threat's going to be really truncated to areas along the Texas coast, the southern half of Louisiana, southern Mississippi, into southwest Alabama, instead of more of an expansive threat to the north. Still going to have plenty of moisture for severe threat, very rich moisture for this time of year, even in the Gulf states there, with 70s dew points out across that region. So we'll show you some soundings here with that frontal zone, uncapped air mass, expecting to see storms by about midday or so along the front back in Texas. So we'll go 21Z here. We'll take a sounding in East Texas. And there you go. So we have plenty of instability. Nice fat Cape profile here between the red temperature profile and the blue parcel trace there. It's pretty fat instability back to the west. And but look at our hodograph, fairly straight looking hodograph, a little bit of low level shear here with the turning of those winds with height, but fairly weak low level shear overall, only about 120 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity, overall straight hodograph. So that's going to be more of a large hail threat. And with this good instability near the freezing level as well, fairly steep lapse rates aloft, and fairly weak low-level shear, strong deep layer shear, that's going to be a favorable look for large hail potential in some of those storms, especially if any more just semi-discrete storms take place. But we should see a lot of storms developing on that front as the synoptic forcing overspreads the warm sector. That is going to lead to a lot of convection along the frontal zone. And speaking of that, let's take a look here. The orientation of the front isn't super favorable with respect to the shear vectors here out in East Texas. So let's take a look at that. And you see very parallel look to the shear vectors with respect to the initiating boundaries. So that's going to mean a lot of storm interactions in a destructive way, and that's going to lead to a lot of convection, and so probably a more messy mode out to the west along the frontal zone. Chase Parrish, I see your comment. That's what we do here on the channel. If you want just the basics of who's in, who's out of the severe threat, there are some other great people out there for that, but we go into the science here. And if you're looking for some more information on what I'm talking about, I do have 2 courses on the channel, my SKUTs and Hodographs course, which is what we're looking at here, and then our Upper Air Maps course. So check those out if you're looking for more information on these. But we go through the science here. This is not just to tell you who's in and who's out of the severe threat, although we do that at the start of the video, at the start of the streams. But my main purpose here with the channel is to go through the science. So if you're looking for more surface level information, there are plenty of great people out there for that. But here we go we go deep into the science. So that is, again, East Texas, 21Z, 3 p.m. Central time, as the storm should be well underway along the frontal zone. More of a large hail and damaging wind threat given the storm mode and the fairly weak low-level shear. Now, out in the warm sector, let's go ahead and take a sounding here out in Louisiana. This is if storms are able to initiate and sustain in the warm sector, which, again, is a big if. Decent instability here, so not really worried about instability with this setup. Fairly nice instability profile up through the atmosphere here, about 1,600 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE, which is pretty strong for this time of year. And but look at our hodographs, pretty straight once again, and fairly limited low-level shear, a little bit veered low-level winds out in the warm sector, leading to just about 118 meters squared per second squared of storm relative helicity, which is on the weaker side. So I think the tornado threat is going to remain relatively low through the day, and we'll need that to really ramp up the low-level shear through the evening to really get that tornado threat going, which is why I'm a little concerned about the overnight hours tonight. Mezzo Matt, welcome. Thank you so much for the super chat. And hey, Josh, ETT guest, welcome. Okay, so, yes, science. We're all weather weenies here. That's exactly right. So again, open warm sector convection, I think if it does sustain, which is a question, more of a damaging wind and large hail threat, maybe an outside chance at a tornado or two during the day, but significant tornadoes certainly would not be really on the table with that kind of a profile. But again, overnight, as those storms move off to the east and that low-level jet ramps up, this is going to be at midnight or so, you see that plume of 35 to 40 knots or so of low-level flow over the warm sector. So we'll take a new sounding there in eastern Louisiana. And you do see how broad this warm sector is with east-west extent. That is always a sign that we have to watch the threat for open warm sector convection with such a broad warm sector. And this is looking a little bit better. So overnight, instability maybe not quite as favorable. A little bit of a warm nose here as progged by the NAM, just below 700 millibars. But fairly skinny instability should be enough to support convection, although there is quite a bit of drier air aloft, I will notice, that may lead to isolated updrafts to struggle a little bit, especially with strong deep layer shear and some drier air aloft. Isolated cells may struggle here, and you're going to need some more clustering of storms to allow that to not be the case. But we do have stronger low-level shear going into the evening and nighttime hours. Again, this is at midnight tonight. Stronger curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph, approaching 200 meters squared per second squared of effective storm relative helicity. And that is going to be more favorable for tornadic activity. Definitely a little bit stronger low-level shear than during the day. We'll go into 9Z, which is going to be 3 a.m. over there to southern Mississippi. Again, truncated warm sector from north-south, but a very broad warm sector from east to west. And here we are in Mississippi. Nothing crazy here, so not really your super large looping hodographs, but definitely enough curvature to support a tornado threat with storms. But instability is going to be on the weaker side here. So if we can have mature storms here moving into this environment, I don't think the instability profile is going to be too much of an issue. And we are going to see perhaps that tornado threat increase a little bit after dark with that increasing low-level jet, but nothing really to support a significant tornado risk with this setup, especially that kind of a shear profile. The storm mode looks to be pretty messy as well. We'll show you some cams here in just a second. But it looks to be overall a fairly messy event. We'll have to watch for the warm sector convection going into the morning with this broad east to west extent of the warm sector. And if any supercells can sustain coming in off the Gulf in that warm advection regime, then we would see more of a tornado risk with those and some spin-ups along the line as well, moving off to the east. And then we go into Saturday as well. I'll zoom back out here, just quickly talk about Saturday. Tomorrow, you see the warm sector does kind of get pinched pretty quickly. Maybe some instability as far north as maybe Virginia into North Carolina. More robust instability to the south. This will be a continuation of storms moving off to the east into this warm sector through Saturday morning into the afternoon with a resultant severe risk. Mostly a damaging wind risk, I think. And it is a low-end tornado risk with any spin-ups in the line. But yeah, that low-level shear profile, not all that favorable. And to note, the NAM is usually the most aggressive with the surface low-level winds. So to see it not really have much of a low-level hodograph to work with, that is not all that favorable for tornadic activity, but could see a spin-up tornado or two in the line tomorrow with some damaging winds. Rye Guy, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you for your support. Really appreciate that. Thank you all for your support. Thanks for tuning in, sticking with us this morning. We'll finish it up here. We'll look at some cams, some convection allowing models. So this is the HRRR, 12's the HRRR. It has the initial storm activity from this morning across Mississippi into Louisiana. That is, again, going to move off to the east pretty quickly, and then by midday or so, we should see an increase in activity along the frontal zone. Your frontal zone is pretty close to where this is right now, so all this activity closely tied to the front. And that should have our first round of severe threat with it. Mainly large hail, damaging winds. These could be elevated as well with storm motion off to the northeast and the frontal zone kind of draped like this. Storms may cross the front, which is also something to watch. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But any storms that can remain along or just south of the frontal zone, then those would have the best threat for damaging winds, maybe a tornado or two, but mostly a damaging wind and isolated large hail threat. We do see some attempts at convection down here coming off the Gulf into Louisiana ahead of the front. And they do become somewhat robust here. Quite a bit of convection in the open warm sector. I tend to think that might be a little much. We do have an uncapped air mass in the warm sector, so perhaps that is going to be the case. But will we see, even if storms do sustain in the warm sector, that low-level shear not all that favorable for tornadic supercells. So the HRF isn't great with this type of setup. It's not great, but it shows it really shows the jet streak nicely. So that's why I used it, and that's the main thing that they do use when looking at models with the omega calculation. So I tend to look for that. I look at the HRF, but All right. Anglin storm intercept, thank you very much. Yeah, rotation near Zachary, Louisiana. Yeah, some of these storms early on may continue to rotate for the next hour or two in this band, but the severe threat's going to be low with the low-level shear waning with time. That is going to be not as much of a threat as we have seen this morning. And this stuff's going to move off to the east, and we'll get our main band here along the front. You see a ton of convection here along the frontal zone. That's going to shift the warm front pretty far south. And the HRRR does have quite a bit of convection in the warm sector. Nothing too robust, though. Not a ton of strong helicity streaks there. Then we get another round along the front back to the west overnight. And then we get this line moving through with some evidence of beans ahead of the line here. This is early tomorrow morning. This is going to be at 4 a.m. Central Time. Tomorrow you have your line to the west and some storms off to the east in the warm sector. Josh, much appreciated. Thank you for the super chat, sir. So we'll have to watch that. Spin-ups in the line possible with any beans that do sustain themselves in the warm sector. Southern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, Florida Panhandle perhaps. Could see that tornado risk going into tomorrow morning, and then things shift off to the east tomorrow with limited instability. But there should see a tornado risk, perhaps with those. Ree, thank you so much. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for the super chat. All right, so that is the HRRR. Let's take a look at the ARW model here. So here we go into the afternoon. You see lots of convection back here to the west along the front, fairly messy. Tend to think a lot of this is going to be elevated, actually, just by the looks of it. We'll take it at 10. This is hour 10 here. So we'll show you. So look at where all this convection is, and then we'll look where the warm sector is. And you see it's kind of the best dew points right in here, kind of easterly winds here, signifying it might be north of the actual main instability axis. So a lot of this activity could be elevated along the front. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But again, any storms in the warm sector will have that greatest severe weather threat for today. But you see a lot of convection. The overall message is that we have a lot of convection along that frontal zone. Going to get very messy, more of a damaging wind and isolated large hail threat. We do have a decent amount of convection in the warm sector through the afternoon. Not all that robust. That may be due to the lack of synoptic forcing. But then during the evening, we might see a little bit of an uptick as we get stronger low-level shear over the warm sector, perhaps a increasing risk for a tornado or two with those warm sector storms going into the evening. But we'll see how that goes. Just going to have to keep an eye on it through the day. Then the NSSL WRF model here, lots of convection back to the west, lots of convection, not all that robust in the warm sector. So the cam's not really showing all of that, all that robust of convection in the warm sector, and even along the front. Just have quite a few issues with this setup. Cold Brew Enema 69, I love that username. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you all for the super chat and for sticking with us this morning. We'll wrap things up here in just a minute. So to sum up, do you think there will be some tornadoes today? I think there will be a couple tornadoes today somewhere, whether that's in the line back to the west or along the warm front or in the warm sector. I think there will be a couple, at least a few tornado warnings today, but there's just a lot of negatives with this setup that I'm not loving as far as a really robust tornado risk today, but would not be shocked to see a couple. Take a look at the NAM 3 kilometer. You know I love that model. Sarcasm. I mean, it's kind of got the same look as the other models. They do have convection in the warm sector, but not all that robust. You don't see a ton of robust helicity streaks or anything, and just not really a ton. But you see overnight, going into the nighttime hours, an increase in convection along the warm sector with maybe some of these bands just out ahead, and that is going to have the greatest tornado risk with stronger low-level shear going into the overnight. So. But yeah, so that's going to wrap things up for this. Again, we're going to get a new outlook in that'd be 11:30, so in an hour or so. But this is what they have for now. I would be surprised, given what we've seen with the models this morning, that if they do upgrade, I don't think that's going to happen, given the flies in the ointment with this setup. But we do have a slight risk for now, level 2 out of 5. And that is a pretty expansive level 2 out of 5 here from East Texas all the way into Alabama, the yellow shaded region here. So Places like Shreveport, Natchitoches, Alexandria, Lake Charles, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Natchez, Vicksburg, Jackson, Hattiesburg, over toward Montgomery, Alabama, Tuscaloosa in that as well, in the greatest severe risk for today. Again, multiple rounds of storms. Lots of storms along the frontal zone back here to the west. Those may tend to be elevated. If so, that would bring more of a large hail threat. And if storms can remain in the warm sector, more of a damaging wind. Isolated tornado risk, but very low during the day. We'll have to watch for any open warm sector convection. Even if warm sector convection does fire across Louisiana and Mississippi during the day, low-level shear is going to be on the weaker side. So isolated tornado risk during the day that should ramp up during the evening with the line to the west and any bands that can storms that can develop within confluence bands ahead of the open warm sector or ahead of the front in the open warm sector overnight. So that tornado risk for now is at a 5%. I think that is more than adequate in the brown shading here. So Texas-Louisiana border, northeastward through Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. 5% there is pretty adequate. 2% extending back into East Texas, all the way into much of Alabama, northern Alabama as well. Damaging wind and large hail. Large hail going to be focused more so along the frontal zone, northern Louisiana, down into East Texas there today. And then tomorrow again, storms will continue overnight into tomorrow morning and afternoon. Marginal risk at this point, level 1 out of 5, with that low-end tornado and damaging wind risk for tomorrow. So fire away your questions, please, in the chat. We'll definitely get those answered here, as many as we can. Is it true the NAM is going to be discontinued? They're working on that at this point, which is sad because I like the NAM. But it is eventually going to be replaced, it looks like, with an RRFS-based model. Is Houston, Texas going to get slammed? Definitely, you're in the marginal risk, level 1 out of 5. Isolated large hail and damaging winds possible. Outside chance of a tornado or two, but it looks fairly low end for the severe risk there. Let's see. A few people that I trust and don't tend to overhype severe weather are saying a strong tornado cannot be ruled out. I agree, but what do you think? From what I'm seeing, I don't see it. These southeast setups, you got to watch for anything. Weird stuff happens in these setups, but just given the overall lack of low-level shear during the day, and even as the low-level jet ramps up into the evening and overnight, I just don't see a profile favorable for significant tornadoes, especially with the storm mode as well. Expected to be fairly messy. Can't rule it out, but I think it's a very, very low chance of a strong tornado. Thoughts on the tornado season this year? Stay tuned into late February. That's when I'm going to do my annual spring tornado forecast. I like to wait because I like to get all of the data in, see how ENSO progresses through the winter, and then get a better idea of how the progression is going to go during the spring. So I like to wait, but keep your eye out on for late February. Last week or two of February is when I'm expecting to release my annual tornado forecast, which I'll talk about all of the ENSO stuff and my thoughts for the spring then. Hopefully it will be better than the current Rufus. It's rarely usable. Yeah, the current RFS is awful. That's why I'm very disappointed. The HRF is going away as well, supposedly, and so that's disappointing. The HRF is a great tool, but we'll see what they do to replace it. Tornado threat going to go past 9 p.m. Central? Yes. So the tornado threat will be shifting off to the east within this slight risk as we go into the nighttime hours. So Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, be on alert for an perhaps slightly increasing tornado risk this evening into the overnight hours, tonight, Friday night, into tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. So yes, the tornado threat will last through the night. So keep those weather radios handy and keep them on full blast. Those will wake you up if a warning is issued for your area, and have multiple ways of receiving warnings. That's always critical in these setups. All right, any other questions today? Any other questions? Otherwise, we will wrap things up. Again, after this, looks pretty quiet. So we don't really have to worry about anything for at least the next week or so after today's setup, today and tomorrow's setup. What do you think of using the HER to compare with mesoanalysis the day of? Mesoanalysis and observed data is always going to be king. And the HER will adjust as it goes on during the day with each individual run. It will adjust to what the mesoanalysis shows for its initialization. So I would always side with mesoanalysis and observed data as much as you can. yeah, losing the HREF is going to be tough, as the Omega folks are going to have to come up with a new way to do the jet translation speed, a new tool to use that's their kind of official tool for the jet translation speed stuff. But yeah, that's going to be disappointing. Thoughts on Shreveport? You are in the slight risk. I tend to think storms will be perhaps more elevated up here to the north with far northward extent, given what we've seen on the models. Lots of convection along the front, pushing that front south. So most of those storms will shift north of the front, meaning that they're elevated, more of a large hail and maybe an isolated damaging wind risk. But the tornado threat should be fairly low up there to the north. And then you can see that the 5% has shifted pretty far south from Shreveport. So mostly a large hail and damaging wind risk up there in Shreveport today. Trying to learn more about reading photographs and your channel has helped. Awesome. Muntjack9638. I appreciate that. Glad the channel has helped. Particular time to watch for any potential tornado genesis around southeast Texas, do you think? Well, that's going to be kind of the first round of storms that is going to go along the front. So late morning to early afternoon is when things should get going. Again, I think the tornado threat is going to be fairly limited with that convection, but non-zero for sure. So I would say start watching by about lunchtime or so, and going through the afternoon into the evening, and that should kind of cover the threat for southeast Texas. If today would go enhanced risk, what would it be for? Honestly, I don't really see any threat that would be high enough to support an enhanced risk. Maybe overnight tornado threat, but I don't think that's going to be the case. And I don't think the damaging wind threat is going to be strong enough to warrant that upgrade to enhanced, but we'll see. In terms of the Rufus, do you think that model's a decent model? I think the RRFS is still an awful model, and I never use it. There's a reason I don't show it in my forecast discussions. It just vomits convection. We can take a look at it here, and you'll see it's probably a very different look than what we're seeing with the other models, and you see just a lot more robust than all of the other models, with some helicity streaks there along the front. And at least it's not showing just vomiting convection in the warm sector. It does have some supercells here, but you see that the overall convection is just a lot more robust than what it's showing on all of our other models. So, take it with a grain of salt. And I tend to side with the other models better or more. Is the Omega model public yet? It's not a model per se. It's just they have their toy webpage, Tornado Outbreak Indicator webpage that takes into account all of the Omega stuff, which is an in-house tool that's not public. But as we've shown, the jet translation speed calculation stuff is certainly public, and I would take a look at their Omega project paper to get more information on that. Any big plans for Storm Chaser coaching this year? Love the training modules and often revisit them. We're just going to go deep into the group coaching. I think that's going to be our main ticket to success with that. With the modules, I enjoy doing those modules, but we're kind of competing with YouTube, which is free there. So we wanted to focus more on the group coaching aspect, where you can have much more interaction with all of our coaches. That should be, I think that what's going to be really cool for us is doing all of those office hour sessions, and the group coaching sessions should be really good. And then we're also going to be doing some stuff on the YouTube channel. We'll be slowly dripping out the modules on the public YouTube channel. For the members, the Academy members, you should already have access to the Google Drive link, so you have all of those modules now and forevermore, well before they're all going to be released on YouTube. So, but yeah, and we're going to perhaps do some forecast live streams on days of severe weather events with some of our coaches as well. So, yeah, excited for what's ahead for that. Opinion on NATOcast. It does well. I think it does better on the lower end days. Where the kind of sneaky days where no one's really expecting it. Let's see NATOcast here. It's just out of curiosity, see what they have for today. So here is their NATOcast forecast for today. They have a small 10% there in southern Mississippi. And you can see they're favoring more the eastern portions of the risk area, probably for that overnight threat of that line moving through higher low-level shear and the warm sector. I tend to use it more on days where it's kind of sneaky, those lower end days, more isolated days. where the SPC might not have a big outlook, but they're like the Hawley, Texas day from last year. That NATOcast was absolutely spot on with a 10 hatched right over that area, and that was a pretty sneaky day. So those days I usually use it more, and it does have a population bias as well. So you'll see oftentimes some biases over big cities. For example, yesterday it has this little area over southern Arizona, but look at where that highest threat is. That's Phoenix and that's Tucson. So some of the big cities tend to factor into it a little bit more, which is not all that great. But it's a decent tool to use. Yeah, the RFS is a prototype model. It's technically not official yet. Derek, thank you for the super chat. Much appreciated. What about Dyersburg, Tennessee tonight? So Dyersburg is going to be north of the risk area. So you can see barely the marginal risk extends into southern Tennessee. There's just not going to be enough instability up there in Tennessee to support a severe threat tonight. So you should be good to go. I would keep an eye on things just to be safe. You never know. Even if you're close to these outlook lines, you should be keeping an eye on things. But Tennessee should be clear from severe weather tonight. Maybe some rumbles of thunder with some elevated storms, but not expecting robust severe weather for Tennessee tonight. So thank you again for the super chat there. Any possible severe setups in the future after today? Looks like we're going to be quiet for the next week at least after today and tomorrow. So what is the Google Drive link? So if you're a Chaser Academy member, the link is in our Discord server. So, but you have to be a Chaser Academy member to access that link because it has all of our modules that we were doing as part of the Chaser Academy in our previous model. So that's over in our Discord server. So you can go to stormchasercoaching.com and that's how you can access and enter our server if you're not already a part of it. And you'll get access to Q&A. As an Academy member, you can get Coach Q&A where we answer questions anytime just for members. And then we do those office hours and group coaching sessions for members as well. Sounding series was great. I appreciate that. At some point, I am looking to kind of update that SKUT and Hodograph series. And that was back. I did that back when I was not as good at speaking on video, so you can see a lot of pauses and stuff. So I have an outline for it. I was going to do it as a full module in the Chaser Academy, but at some point I do plan to upgrade that series and add a lot more stuff than what we have now. You are a member, so go to the Discord, and it should be in the. I don't have my. Let's see here. So if you go to the Discord for Chaser Academy members, and you go to the channel where it says Legacy Content, so it's under the Chaser Academy tab in the Discord, the Storm Chaser Coaching Discord. It's under Legacy Content. That's where you can find the Google Drive link. All right. So any more questions on today's setup? Why do we have a few tornado warnings today? We have had, so this was the Jackson sounding from this morning. Let's see. Yeah, so we had enough instability to support some surface-based storms, no capping inversions or anything, with still strong low-level shear. So that is why we've had a few tornado warnings today across Mississippi. Again, that's expected to move off to the east and wane with time. But that's basically why we've had a little bit of an overperformance this morning. Enough surface-based instability with strong low-level shear. But yes, as you said, most of the main round today is going to be through the afternoon and into the evening, and evening especially for the Gulf, Louisiana eastward into Mississippi and Alabama. Texas, Louisiana going to be the main threat for this afternoon. Any plans on the November 17th, 2013 outbreak for a breakdown? Yes, that's on my list. Are we thinking North Louisiana has the best chance for any potential discrete cells overnight? So it'll be just ahead of the line. So I would say this portion of the slight risk. So, Louisiana into Mississippi, southern half of Mississippi, and western Alabama going to be the greatest threat for the overnight hours, the eastern portions of the slight risk. Appreciation from Italy. Thank you so much for the super chat. Been following the channel for a while as a hobby now. Almost follow U.S. weather more than mine. Much appreciated. Thank you so much for the super chat. Glad you are enjoying the channel over there in Italy. Welcome. Biggest threat area this afternoon. Anybody in the slight risk, but for the afternoon hours, it's going to be along the frontal zone and perhaps out, if any storms can get going here, central to southern Louisiana, southern Mississippi. But that's a big if given the flies in the ointment that we talked about. But anyone in the slight risk and even the marginal risk needs to be on alert all day today, really from late morning to early afternoon and onward. Any chance of convective temperature being breached in the warm sector and could help sustain the storm? So as we said, that's not really going to be the issue. We have an uncapped air mass in the warm sector, and you see convective temperature is 76. That's going to be easily reached here. I would almost guess that we probably have convective temperatures very close to being breached already. Yeah, see 75 there in central Louisiana, 74. So that's not going to be the issue. The air mass is uncapped in the warm sector, but when you don't have synoptic forcing for ascent, it's sometimes difficult for those storms to sustain themselves. They can go up in that uncapped air mass, but to become really robust, you need that forcing. Like, for example, I know this is the upper echelon example, but April 27, 2011, your shortwave was going right through the northern portion of the warm sector. So you're getting that glancing blow all through the event, helping to sustain those storms. Here, that shortwave is going to be way off to the west, not really impacting the warm sector. So that is that's kind of the thing that I have questions about storm sustaining, is just the lack of synoptic forcing. But instability in the warm sector should not be an issue, as we're already uncapped. And that's why we've seen some surface-based storms already this morning. Storm Chaser Coaching in the chat. What's up, guys? All right. Any final questions? Let me know here in the chat. Otherwise, we will wrap this up again. Here's the risk for today. We're getting a new outlook soon here, but this is what they have now. Would be surprised if it changes a ton. But everybody out here in the risk areas today, stay safe. Have those weather radios handy if you have one. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings, and especially those of you, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, this could extend into the night. So you need to be on alert through the nighttime hours for a severe threat as it comes through this evening. But yes, that is going to do it here, folks. Thank you, everybody, for all the super chats and for all your viewership today. And always much appreciated. Very grateful for you all. So, yeah, that's going to do it. Thank you all, and we will see you next time.